July 2007, 3:47 a.m., La Picota Prison, Bogota, Colombia. Picture this. A man sleeps in what they call a cell, but it's nothing like what you're imagining. Custom furniture, flat screen TV, satellite phone charging on the nightstand, a woman who's not his wife asleep next to him, armed guards outside his door, not to keep him in, but to keep others out. His name is Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia. The streets called him Chupeta, and he's about to learn what a real prison feels like, because in 6 hours, DEA agents and Colombian special forces will bust through that door, slap him in chains, and drag him to a plane bound for the United States. For the first time in years, Chupeta will be in a cell he doesn't control. For the first time in his life, the game will actually be over. This is that story. Born January 16, 1963 in Palmyra, Colombia. Valle del Cauca Department, sugarcane fields as far as you can see. Working class family, no money, no connections, no escape from poverty through legal means. This is where Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia entered the world. But here's what you need to understand about Colombia in the 1970s and 80s. The drug trade wasn't just crime. It was infrastructure. It was employment. It was the only Fortune 500 company hiring kids from neighborhoods like his. Pablo Escobar was making headlines. The Medellin cartel was drowning in money, and kids like Chupeta were watching, learning, calculating. Most kids his age were thinking about factory work or agricultural labor, maybe a shot at university if they got lucky. But Chupeta, he had different plans. By his early 20s, he wasn't moving weight on street corners. He was already thinking bigger. Distribution networks, supply chain management, political protection. This wasn't street hustle. This was corporate strategy with cocaine instead of coffee. The catalyst came in the late 1980s. Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel was waging war against the Colombian government. Bombs, assassinations, complete chaos. Heat was everywhere. The Cali cartel saw an opportunity. While Escobar was fighting the state, Cali was buying it. And Chupeta, he was right there, learning from the masters. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela, Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela, Jose Santa Cruz Londoño, the men who turned drug trafficking into a science. Here's what Chupeta understood that most didn't. Violence attracts attention. Money buys silence. Medellin exploded buildings. Cali bought judges. Medellin killed politicians. Cali funded their campaigns. Most would have followed Escobar's playbook: go loud, go violent, go legendary. But Chupeta learned the opposite lesson: go quiet, go corrupt, go untouchable. By the early 1990s, Pablo Escobar was dead. The Medellin cartel was destroyed, and the Cali cartel stepped into the biggest power vacuum in drug trafficking history. Chupeta rose with them, not as the face, never as the face, as the infrastructure. He controlled major cocaine routes from Colombia to Mexico, distribution networks across the United States, money laundering operations through dozens of legitimate businesses, transportation logistics, boats, planes, submarines. Let's talk numbers. At its peak, the Cali cartel was moving 70 to 80% of the world's cocaine supply. Not 70 to 80 kilos, 70 to 80%. Chupeta's piece of that? Estimates put his personal operation at 30 to 40 tons of cocaine per month flowing through his networks. 30 tons every single month. That's not a drug dealer, that's a logistics company. His organization generated between $1.5 billion and $3 billion in revenue annually, not profit, revenue. The actual cocaine moving through his routes was worth more than most countries' GDP. Think about that. And here's the thing, nobody knew his face. While other narcos were getting famous, magazine covers, newspaper profiles, folk songs, Chupeta was invisible. He underwent multiple plastic surgeries, changed his face repeatedly, became unrecognizable even to people who'd known him for years. Extreme paranoia? Maybe. Strategic genius? Absolutely. By the mid-1990s, you couldn't arrest what you couldn't identify. The lifestyle? Quiet but untouchable. He wasn't buying golden toilets or private zoos. He was buying politicians, judges, police chiefs, military commanders. He owned legitimate businesses across Colombia, farms, construction companies, import-export firms, properties in multiple countries under dozens of different names, protection at every level of Colombian government. One prosecutor later said, trying to investigate Chupeta was like trying to arrest a ghost who paid your boss's salary. Here's where Chupeta proved something different. You don't need to be famous to be powerful. You just need to be untouchable. And for years, he was. But here's where the story turns dark, because controlling billions in cocaine doesn't happen without bodies. Let's be clear about what Chupeta's organization did. Case 1, the accountant, Cali, one of Chupeta's financial managers, a man who handled money laundering for the organization, started skimming. Not much, maybe $200,000 over 6 months. He thought he was smart, thought the numbers were too complex for anyone to notice. He was wrong. Chupeta's people found the discrepancy, brought the accountant to a warehouse, tortured him for 3 days to find out where the money went and who else knew. Then they dissolved his body in acid. No body, no evidence, no investigation. The message, crystal clear. You can steal from the government, from civilians, from rivals, but you don't steal from the organization. Not once. Case 2, the informant, Bogota, a mid-level trafficker in Chupeta's network, got arrested, faced 20 years, started talking to prosecutors about distribution routes and money transfers. Before he could testify, his entire family was murdered. Wife, 2 kids, his mother, then him. Found in his jail cell, throat cut. Guards claimed they saw nothing. This wasn't emotion, this was strategy. The message to anyone thinking about cooperation: your family pays before you do. Case 3, the rival, Palmyra. A smaller trafficking organization tried to use one of Chupeta's routes without permission. They moved 3 tons of cocaine through a corridor his people controlled. They thought they could get away with it because they had paid off the same police Chupeta had. They were wrong. Chupeta's enforcers found the rivals' entire leadership, 6 men, and executed them in a single night. Left the bodies in the street with a sign, "This plaza is closed." That's not revenge. That's territorial enforcement. The violence wasn't random. It was calculated, surgical. Every killing had a purpose. Maintain discipline inside the organization. Eliminate threats from outside. Send messages that would prevent future problems. Chupeta didn't need to be the most violent. He just needed to be the most certain. You cross him, you die. Your family might die. Your associates might die. The mathematics are simple. The game is controlled through fear, and fear requires proof. He provided it repeatedly. By 1995, Chupeta had everything: billions in assets, complete protection, invisible operations, power that reached into every level of Colombian society. The Cali cartel was at its absolute peak. They weren't just trafficking cocaine, they were running Colombia. But here's the thing about empires built on corruption: they're only stable until the money stops flowing. And the United States was applying pressure like never before. June 9th, 1995, everything changed. Gilberto Rodriguez Orejuela, one of the Cali cartel's top leaders, was arrested. Miguel Rodriguez Orejuela followed. Then Jose Santa Cruz Londoño. The heads of the organization were falling. But here's what nobody expected. Chupeta didn't fall with them. He went deeper underground. More surgeries, more false identities, new networks. Most narcos would have run to another country, tried to rebuild somewhere else. But Chupeta stayed in Colombia because he understood something others didn't. Colombia wasn't the problem. Colombia was the solution. As long as he could buy the system, he could control it. And he did for years. But the pressure kept building. The U.S. was offering rewards, $5 million for information leading to his capture. Colombian authorities were getting more aggressive, not because they wanted to, but because Washington was forcing their hand. Extradition treaties were being signed. The old game of bribing your way to safety was ending. And then it happened. August 7th, 2007, Chupeta was arrested in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Not in Colombia, Brazil, because even after everything, he still had enough power in Colombia to avoid capture there. He had to leave the country to finally get caught. But here's where the real story begins. Because getting arrested, that was just the opening move. Chupeta was extradited back to Colombia, sent to La Picota prison in Bogota. And this is where most stories would end. Drug lord gets arrested, thrown in prison, game over. Not for Chupeta. Here's what nobody talks about. Colombian prisons in the 2000s weren't designed to hold people like him. They were designed to contain them politically while letting them continue operating practically. Because Colombia was terrified of extradition, sending their own citizens to American prisons looked weak, looked like surrender, like they couldn't handle their own criminals. So the compromise was this: arrest them, put them in Colombian prisons, claim victory, and let them keep running their empires from inside. Let's be clear about what Chupeta's prison actually was. La Picota wasn't a prison. It was a headquarters. Within weeks of arriving, Chupeta had bribed the warden, bought off guards at every level, installed his own security inside the facility, controlled entire cell blocks. His cell, private room with real furniture, flat screen TV and satellite connection, cell phones, laptops, internet access, visitors whenever he wanted, including prostitutes, private chef preparing his meals, personal doctor on call. One former guard later testified, Chupeta didn't live in a cell, he had an office. Other inmates had to ask his permission to use certain areas of the prison. Guards reported to him before they reported to the warden. He wasn't in prison, he was relocated. But here's the insane part: the drug empire didn't stop. From his cell, Chupeta continued to coordinate international cocaine shipments, approve distribution routes, manage money laundering networks across 3 continents, order executions of rivals and informants, conduct business meetings with his organization's leadership. How? Through lawyers who weren't really lawyers, family members who weren't really family, corrupt guards who carried messages, cell phones that guards smuggle in daily, encrypted communications through prison computers. U.S. investigators later confirmed his arrest barely slowed the cartel down. Shipments kept moving. Money kept flowing. The organization kept operating. The only difference? Now he ran it from a room with bars on the windows instead of a penthouse with a view. Think about that. Colombia arrested one of the world's most wanted drug traffickers, put him in prison, claimed victory, and he just kept working. Here's why this happened. The political calculation. Colombia's government was stuck. Option 1, actually imprison him, risk him exposing every politician and official he'd bribed over the years. Option 2, let him operate from prison, maintain the illusion of justice while avoiding political scandal. Option 3, extradite him to the U.S., admit Colombia couldn't handle his own criminals. They chose option 2 because corruption was cheaper than confrontation, and Chupeta understood this. He'd spent decades building relationships with judges, prosecutors, military commanders, politicians. He had dirt on everyone, so they made a deal without ever saying it out loud. You stay quiet about us, we stay quiet about you. Prison became protection. For years this worked. Chupeta lived comfortably, ran his empire, avoided extradition. The Colombian government could point to his arrest as proof they were tough on drugs. The US government was furious but couldn't do much about it, and the cocaine kept flowing. But empires built on corruption have an expiration date, and Chupeta's came due on August 22nd, 2008. The United States had been applying pressure for years, threatening to cut aid, threatening to sanction Colombian officials, threatening to expose the whole corrupt system. Finally, Colombia broke. They agreed to extradite Chupeta to the United States, and this time there was no buying his way out. August 22nd, 2008, 3:47 a.m. DEA agents and Colombian special forces raided La Picota prison. They didn't go through the warden. They didn't notify the guards in advance. They couldn't because everyone was compromised. They hit the prison like a military operation. Chupeta was found in his cell, asleep next to a woman who wasn't his wife, surrounded by contraband, with enough electronic equipment to run a small business. No shots fired, no resistance, because even Chupeta understood. You can't bribe the DEA when they're standing in your room at 4 a.m. with extradition papers signed by both governments. They dragged him out in handcuffs, threw him on a plane, flew him to Miami. For the first time in his entire criminal career, Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia was in a prison he didn't control, the real prison, Federal Detention Center, Miami. No cell phones, no visitors except lawyers, no private food, no protection, just a concrete room and 23-hour lockdown. This was the first time Chupeta actually faced consequences. And here's what happened. He broke, not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly, strategically, the same way he built his empire. He started cooperating, not because he suddenly developed a conscience, but because the mathematics had changed. In Colombia, silence was valuable. He had leverage. People needed him quiet. In an American federal prison, he had nothing. So he traded information about trafficking routes, still active, money laundering networks in Europe and Asia, corrupt officials in Colombia and Mexico, other cartel operators still free, in exchange for a reduced sentence, protection, survival. September 2009, federal court, Southern Districts of Florida. Chupeta pleaded guilty to conspiracy to import cocaine, conspiracy to launder money, running a continuing criminal enterprise. The judge sentenced him to 30 years in federal prison. With cooperation credit, he'll serve about 20. He's currently held in a federal facility under protective custody, because when you flip on cartels, you don't get to walk the yard. The aftermath? The family. Chupeta's wife and children fled Colombia. New identities, new lives, under protection. They've never spoken publicly, never given interviews, disappeared completely. Smart, the organization. Without Chupeta, his network fractured. Some operators joined other cartels. Some got arrested. Some got killed by rivals who moved into the power vacuum. His routes, taken over by Mexican cartels, Sinaloa, Jalisco New Generation, others. The cocaine kept flowing, just under different management. That's the thing about this game. The demand never stops. When one supplier falls, another steps up. Always. The prison system. After Chupeta's extradition, Colombia had to admit the obvious. Their prisons were cartel headquarters. They reformed the system, new protocols, federal oversight, less corruption. Did it work? Partially. Are there still narcos running operations from Colombian prisons? Yes, but Nothing like what Chupeta had. That level of control, that was unique. The money, Chupeta's organization generated billions. U.S. authorities seized $250 million in assets, properties across Colombia, Panama, and Mexico, dozens of legitimate businesses. But here's what nobody found: the rest. Estimates suggest $1 billion to $2 billion is still missing, hidden in offshore accounts, buried in cash, invested in untraceable assets. It's out there somewhere. Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia, from invisible kingpin to federal inmate. Here's what Chupeta's story actually represents: not glorification, not celebration, but understanding. He proved something most narcos don't understand. Fame is weakness. Invisibility is power. He stayed anonymous, stayed surgical, stayed strategic, and it worked until it didn't. Because here's the lesson: you can buy prisons, you can buy politicians, you can buy protection, but you can't buy your way out of American federal custody. Chupeta controlled an entire prison system, ran a billion-dollar empire from a cell, stayed untouchable for decades, and he's still going to die in prison. That's not opinion, that's fact, that's mathematics. The game always ends the same way, always, without exception. You either die in the streets or you die in a cage. Chupeta chose the cage after years of pretending he could avoid both. Let's be clear about what this means. If you're a kid looking at this story thinking he almost made it or he was smarter than the rest, you're missing the point. He'll spend 30 years in a cell. That's not winning. That's not even close. The most successful drug trafficker in this story is still in prison, still cooperating, still looking over his shoulder. That's the legacy. Remember the name, forget the glorification. Learn the lesson, skip the experience. Juan Carlos Ramirez Abadia, Chupeta, the man who controlled the prison and lost his freedom anyway. That's the story, that's the truth, that's all.